I take care of them, which ain't easy, cause their hobby is murder.
They were rich, they were glamorous, and somehow they kept stumbling over dead bodies. Heart to Heart wasn't just a TV show. It was a fantasy dressed up as a mystery, a love story disguised as a thriller, and a hit so dazzling it made murder look like a second honeymoon. But behind the silk shirts and candlelit dinners, nothing about this show was as smooth as it looked. The casting almost collapsed before a single scene was shot. The man delivering the most iconic opening in television history had been blacklisted by Hollywood for decades. And the chemistry everyone assumed was performance, it ran deeper than any script could explain. These are 20 weird facts about Heart to Heart. And stay for the bonus, because one very famous director walked onto set, laughed at everything he saw, and called it the most fun he'd ever had doing absolutely nothing. Pull up the rolls. This one moves fast. The show almost never existed at all, and the man responsible for that near miss wasn't a network executive or a rival producer. It was the script itself. Sidney Sheldon, the best-selling novelist and legendary television architect behind I Dream of Jeannie and The Patty Duke Show, conceived Heart to Heart as a glamorous, fast-moving mystery series built around a married couple of adventurers with more charm than sense and more money than it's either. He had the concept locked early. Two beautiful people, obscenely wealthy, solving crimes between cocktail parties and candlelit dinners. Simple, irresistible, and completely commercial. But when he sat down to pitch it, the networks weren't buying. They said married couples didn't generate tension. They said wealth alienated audiences. They said the whole premise felt like wishful thinking, dressed up as drama. Sheldon didn't argue with them. He went back, sharpened the pitch, and returned with something they couldn't dismiss. He reframed the Harts not as untouchable elites, but as people the audience wanted to be. Jonathan wasn't old money. He was self-made, brilliant, physical, the kind of man who built something from nothing and still opened doors for his wife. Jennifer wasn't a trophy. She was sharp, funny, fearless, and could hold her own in a room full of killers without flinching. Together, they weren't above the audience. They were the best version of what the audience dreamed about on a Friday night. That shift changed everything, and the show that was almost buried in a development meeting became one of the most beloved series of its era. Before Robert Wagner ever slipped into Jonathan Hart's custom-tailored wardrobe, the role belonged to someone else entirely. The original vision for the Heart to Heart leading man pointed toward a different kind of Hollywood star, someone with edge, someone darker, someone whose charm came with a hint of danger underneath. Several names circulated in early development conversations. One of them was Cary Grant. Not as a serious candidate for a weekly series, Grant had long since retired from acting and wasn't coming back for television. But the idea of Grant's particular brand of effortless sophistication was the template, the ghost that haunted the room. Producers wanted someone who could wear a tuxedo like it was a second skin, trade witty lines without breaking a sweat, and then throw a convincing punch before the commercial break. When Robert Wagner's name entered the conversation, the room shifted. Wagner had spent decades building exactly that persona. He was old-school Hollywood royalty, a man who had grown up in the studio system and absorbed its elegance like sunlight. He carried the polish without the pretension. He knew how to be likable without working too hard at it. And he understood instinctively that the best kind of charm is the kind that never announces itself. The moment producers saw him alongside Stefanie Powers, every other conversation stopped. Nobody else was seriously considered after that. Wagner didn't win the role. He simply arrived and the role recognized him. Stefanie Powers almost wasn't Jennifer Hart either, and the story of how she landed the role is less about auditions and more about timing, instinct, and the particular magic that happens when the right person walks through the right door at exactly the right moment. Powers had built a solid career throughout the 1960s and 1970s, most notably from her run on The Girl from UNCLE, but by the late 1970s, she was between the kind of defining role that would cement her legacy. When Heart to Heart came to her, she read the script with the careful eye of someone who had been in the industry long enough to know the difference between a show with legs and one that would quietly disappear after 6 episodes. She saw something in Jennifer Hart that genuinely excited her. Jennifer wasn't written as an accessory to her husband. She was a former photojournalist, adventurous, independently minded, fully capable of getting herself into trouble without any help from Jonathan. Powers recognized the character's potential immediately, but what sealed the deal wasn't the script. It was the chemistry reading with Wagner. The two of them sat down across from the producers, started running lines, and something happened in the room that nobody had planned and nobody could manufacture. They fell into a rhythm so natural, so easy and warm that the producers quietly exchanged glances. It didn't feel like two actors reading. It felt like two people who already knew each other. Powers later said she knew within 10 minutes that the show would work.
Terrific lady.
Lionel Stander was 71 years old when he walked onto the Hart 2. Hart set for the first time and slipped into the role of Max, the Hart's wisecracking, fiercely loyal housekeeper and driver. And for anyone who knew his history, the fact that he was there at all was nothing short of staggering, because Lionel Stander hadn't quietly retired from Hollywood in the 1950s and then made a comeback. He had been ripped out of it during the era of McCarthyism and the Hollywood blacklist. Stander was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1953. He refused to cooperate, refused to name names, refused to perform the kind of political theater the committee demanded, and he paid for it completely. His career in Hollywood evaporated almost overnight. For years, he worked in Europe, surviving on foreign productions and stage work, rebuilding slowly in a place that hadn't decided to punish him. When he finally returned to American television, it wasn't with bitterness. It was with the kind of bone-deep humor that only comes from a man who has already been through the worst and survived it. The gravel voice, the knowing smirk, the way he delivered every line like he was the only adult in the room, none of that was performance. That was a man who had genuinely seen everything and found it all slightly ridiculous. Max wasn't just a character. He was Lionel Stander walking back through a door that should have stayed closed and owning every inch of the hallway.
By the way, my name is Max.
The opening narration of Heart to Heart is one of the most recognizable pieces of television writing ever put on screen. Short, punchy, and somehow both completely absurd and completely perfect at the same time. Max's deadpan description of Jonathan and Jennifer Hart, delivered in that unmistakable gravel rumble, wasn't just a way to introduce the characters to new viewers. It became the identity of the show. And what most people don't know is that the narration almost didn't sound anything like what audiences heard. Early versions of the opening were more conventional, standard television setups, quick cuts, narration that explained the premise without any of the wit. The producers experimented with different tones, different structures, different ways to frame these two glamorous people and their peculiar hobby of investigating murders between dinner parties. But nothing landed. Everything felt like every other show. It was Stander himself who pushed for something sharper, something stranger, something that would acknowledge the slight silliness of the whole enterprise without undermining it. He understood instinctively that the comedy in the opening had to be entirely straight-faced to work. If Max winked at the camera, the whole thing collapsed. But if Max delivered those lines with total sincerity, like a man genuinely proud of his employers despite the trail of corpses they seemed to attract, then the audience would be in on the joke and delighted to stay there. The narration was refined right up until production locked it in. By then, Stander had made it entirely his own.
I take care of them, which ain't easy, cause
The little dog named Freeway didn't just steal scenes, he systematically dismantled them. The scruffy terrier mix, who served as the Hart family's beloved pet, was, by nearly every account from cast and crew, the most reliably chaotic element on the entire set. Animals in television production are controlled variables at best, and Freeway was not a controlled variable. He was an enthusiastic, affectionate, and completely unpredictable presence who seemed to view the carefully blocked scenes around him as a series of personal invitations to do something unexpected. He wandered into shots uninvited. He sat on marks that belonged to human actors. He greeted guest stars with a kind of physical enthusiasm that required costume department intervention. He once reportedly knocked over a prop arrangement that had taken the set dressing team the better part of an afternoon to complete, and he did it with an expression that suggested he was enormously proud of the accomplishment. Directors learned to simply build Freeway's chaos into their shooting schedules, adding buffer time after any scene that required the dog to be present. And yet, curiously, some of the show's most warmly remembered moments came precisely because of what Freeway did when nobody could predict it. There was a particular quality to the scenes where Wagner or Powers had to respond to something the dog did genuinely, rather than on cue. The warmth was real because the surprise was real. Freeway wasn't performing, he was just being Freeway, and somehow, that was exactly right. While Heart to Heart was charming its way through Friday night primetime and earning its reputation as glamorous escapist television, Stefanie Powers was living through one of the most devastating private experiences of her life, and almost nobody watching the show had any idea. Powers had been in a deep and serious relationship with actor William Holden since the early 1970s. Holden was one of Hollywood's greatest stars, the Oscar-winning face of Sunset Boulevard and Stalag 17, and the two of them had built a genuine life together, including a shared passion for wildlife conservation in Kenya that would define Powers' life's work for decades to come. When Heart to Heart began production, their relationship was still intact and quietly powerful, but Holden was struggling deeply with alcoholism, a battle that had shadowed his career and his personal life for years. In November 1981, while the show was in full production and Powers was at the height of her Heart to Heart success, William Holden died alone in his Santa Monica apartment. He had fallen, struck his head, and was not found for days. Powers received the news in the middle of a working week. She was, by all accounts, devastated, and yet, she returned to set. She showed up, hit her marks, delivered her lines, laughed with Robert Wagner on cue, and gave audiences absolutely nothing that hinted at the grief she was carrying. The warmth people saw on screen during that period wasn't just acting, it was survival. Robert Wagner's personal life during the Heart to Heart years carried its own shattering weight that ran parallel to the show's breezy glamour in a way that now feels almost unbearable to consider. In November 1981, the same year Powers lost William Holden, Wagner's wife Natalie Wood drowned under circumstances that were mysterious, controversial, and heartbreaking. Wood, one of the most beloved actresses of her generation, was found floating in the water near Catalina Island after a night aboard their yacht. Wagner was on the boat. The circumstances were never fully explained to the public's satisfaction, and the case has been reinvestigated multiple times in the decades since. The grief Wagner carried was public and enormous, and utterly unavoidable. And yet, like Powers, he returned to the set of Heart to Heart. He put on Jonathan Hart's jacket, picked up Jennifer Hart's hand, and walked through scenes about champagne and murder and weekend getaways as if the world outside the soundstage was exactly as simple as the script suggested. Colleagues who worked with him during that period have spoken since about the quiet professionalism he brought, the way he compartmentalized not as a denial of grief, but as a form of dignity. The show became, in some strange way, a place where the weight could be set down temporarily, and what the audience experienced as light, effortless charm was built in part on something much harder than it looked. The show's look, that signature blend of high gloss, Bel Air elegance, and European vacation chic, didn't happen by accident. Every frame of Heart to Heart was a deliberate aesthetic choice designed to make the audience feel like they had been quietly upgraded. The production design team worked obsessively on the details of the Hart household, the cars, the wardrobes, and the locations to create a world that felt aspirational rather than alienating. Jonathan Hart's house was real. The sprawling Holmby Hills mansion used as the exterior was an actual private residence, filmed under arrangement with the owners, and its grandeur was entirely genuine. But the interior scenes were shot on meticulously dressed sound stages built to match the home's scale and tone. Costume designer Nolan Miller, who would go on to define the entire visual vocabulary of 1980s television glamour through his work on Dynasty, brought his eye to Stefanie Powers' wardrobe and turned Jennifer Hart into one of the most elegantly dressed women in prime time. Every necklace, every gown, every casual weekend outfit was chosen with the same care you'd bring to a feature film. Miller understood that in a show built on fantasy, the clothes were part of the argument. They were telling the audience that this world was real, that it had texture and weight and taste, and the audience believed it completely because Miller never gave them a reason not to. Heart to Heart was essentially a modern reinvention of The Thin Man, the classic 1930s film series built around Nick and Nora Charles. The witty, wealthy, martini-drinking crime-solving couple played by William Powell and Myrna Loy. Sidney Sheldon knew it. The producers knew it. And the comparison was something the creative team quietly embraced rather than shied away from, because the Thin Man template worked for a very specific reason that had nothing to do with murder mysteries. It worked because of the marriage, not despite it, because of it. Most television and film logic of the era insisted that romantic tension required unresolved desire, that once two characters got together, the drama evaporated and audiences moved on. The Thin Man had blown that assumption apart 40 years earlier by proving that a loving, equal, mutually respectful marriage between two people who genuinely liked each other could be the most compelling dynamic on screen. Heart to Heart bet everything on the same idea. Jonathan and Jennifer weren't solving crimes to fill the space left by romantic friction. They were solving crimes because they were bored at parties and found each other infinitely more interesting than anyone else in the room. The love was never in doubt. The fun was never in doubt. And that combination, absolute certainty wrapped in absolute joy, was something audiences in 1979 hadn't seen enough of. They recognized it immediately, and they came back every week just to be in the room with it. The guest star roster on Heart to Heart reads like a farewell tour of Hollywood's golden generation, and that wasn't accidental. Producers made a deliberate policy of casting established film legends who had receded from the spotlight, giving them sharp material and enough room to remind audiences exactly why they had mattered. Roddy McDowall appeared, Shelley Winters appeared. Cesar Romero turned up looking magnificent. For many of these actors, a Heart to Heart guest slot was the most visible American television work they had received in years. But not every booking went smoothly. One veteran actress, during a pivotal two-hander scene with Wagner, decided midway through the second day of shooting that her character's motivation needed a complete rethink. She stopped the scene, sat down, and delivered a 20-minute explanation of her revised interpretation to a director who had 8 pages left to shoot before sundown. Wagner listened patiently, asked a single clarifying question, gently steered her back toward the original script, and somehow got the scene finished before the light died. Nobody was credited with saving that episode, but everyone on set knew exactly who had. The Hart's cars were as much a part of the show's identity as the house, the dogs, or the wardrobe, and keeping them looking immaculate while simultaneously being driven through the kind of production schedules that chew through vehicles was a constant behind-the-scenes battle. Jonathan Hart's burgundy Mercedes 450SL became one of the most recognizable automobiles in primetime television. But what viewers didn't see was the rotating stable of identical vehicles maintained off-camera to cover damage, wear, and the particular havoc that comes from repeated takes on winding canyon roads. The stunt coordinator on the series later revealed that at least one vehicle used during a chase sequence in the second season was operating under insurance coverage that specifically excluded the exact maneuver the script called for. The paperwork gap was discovered the morning of the shoot. After a brief and extremely tense conversation between the production manager and the insurance broker, the decision was made to proceed anyway. Adjust the camera angle to minimize apparent speed, and filed the paperwork in the order that made everyone least uncomfortable. The shot is in the episode. It looks effortless. Aaron Spelling produced Heart to Heart, and if that name sounds like a guarantee of a certain kind of polished commercial television, it's because it absolutely was. Spelling was the most powerful producer in prime time during this era, simultaneously running Charlie's Angels, Fantasy Island, The Love Boat, and Heart to Heart, among others. His operation was a machine and an enormous one, but Heart to Heart occupied a specific emotional place in Spelling's portfolio that his other shows didn't quite match. He spoke about it in interviews with genuine warmth, describing the Harts as the couple he wished existed in real life. The show reflected something personal for him, a belief that decency, loyalty, and playfulness between two people could be the most exciting thing on television if you trusted the audience to appreciate it. That belief shaped every creative decision, from casting to story selection. When scripts came in that pushed Jonathan and Jennifer into genuinely dark territory, spelling would often send them back with a single note. These two people are happy. Don't forget that. The writers never forgot it twice. The pilot movie that launched Heart to Heart aired in August 1979 and was directed by Tom Mankiewicz, the screenwriter behind several James Bond films, including Diamonds Are Forever and Live and Let Die. That connection was not coincidental. The Bond influence was baked into the concept from the beginning. Sidney Sheldon and the producers wanted the show to carry the same mixture of glamour, danger, dry wit, and romantic confidence that defined the best Bond films, except this time with a committed marriage at the center instead of disposable conquest. Mankiewicz understood the assignment completely. He shot the pilot with a cinematic scale that made it feel less like a television movie and more like a feature that had accidentally ended up on ABC. The locations were used expansively, the action was staged with genuine choreographic thought, and the chemistry between Wagner and Powers was given room to breathe rather than being rushed through to reach the next plot point. The pilot's success was large enough that when the series was ordered, everyone involved understood they were being asked to sustain something that had been built at a level above the normal television baseline. They mostly managed it. Heart to Heart ran for 5 seasons, ending in 1984, and the official explanation for its conclusion was simple network mathematics. Ratings had softened, the time slot had grown more competitive, the show had run its natural course. All of that was true, but people close to the production have suggested over the years that the ending carried an emotional dimension that the official story didn't fully capture. Wagner and Powers had spent 5 years building something together that existed in a strange space between professional and personal. The friendship between them was real and deep. The rhythm they had developed, the shorthand, the trust, the way each knew exactly how much space to give the other in a scene had taken years to build and couldn't be replicated anywhere else. When the cancellation came, both of them have described it in separate interviews as something closer to loss than relief. Not the loss of a job, the loss of a place. A particular world they had created together where the problems were always solvable by dinner and nobody ever stayed dead for long. Walking away from that was harder than the rating stories suggested. The show's theme music, composed by Mark Snow years before he would achieve immortality with the X-Files theme, carried a specific emotional quality that production understood was doing enormous work every single week. A television theme has roughly 90 seconds to tell an audience everything they need to know about what they're about to watch. The tone, the pace, the promise of how they're going to feel when the credits roll. Heart to Heart's theme delivered romantic momentum, a sense of forward motion wrapped in warmth. Something that said, adventure is coming, and you will enjoy every second of it. Snow later recalled that the brief called for something that felt simultaneously like a cocktail party and a car chase, which is an almost impossible instruction to execute in a single piece of music. He pulled it off. The theme became inseparable from the show's identity, which is exactly what a great television theme should do. You couldn't hear it without immediately picturing Wagner behind the wheel of that Mercedes Powers beside him, both of them heading somewhere neither of them was supposed to go. The reunion movies that followed the series, 8 of them produced between 1993 and 1996, are often treated as a footnote to the original run, but they deserve more credit than that. Wagner and Powers didn't return to Heart because the money was easy or because they had nothing better to do. They came back because the audience had never stopped asking. For nearly a decade after cancellation, viewer mail continued to arrive at the studio. Fan letters, requests, petitions. People wanted Jonathan and Jennifer back, and not in a nostalgic, wouldn't it be nice way. They wanted them back with genuine urgency, the way you want to hear from an old friend you've lost track of. When the reunion films finally arrived, the response confirmed everything the mail had promised. Audiences watched in enormous numbers. Critics who expected something diminished found instead that the warmth was completely intact. Wagner and Powers stepped back into those characters like people returning to a house they had built themselves, knowing exactly where every room was and exactly how the light fell in the afternoon. The years hadn't changed anything that mattered. Sidney Sheldon's involvement in Heart to Heart was foundational, but the day-to-day creative machinery of the show operated largely through a writer's room that had to solve a very specific and unusual problem every single week. The Harts could not be stupid. That was the rule that made everything else harder. Most mystery television of the era operated by keeping its investigators slightly behind the audience, letting viewers feel clever by spotting clues the protagonist missed. Heart to Heart refused that dynamic entirely. Jonathan and Jennifer were supposed to be the smartest people in every room they entered, which meant the mysteries had to be constructed so that the villains were genuinely clever, the clues genuinely hidden, and the solution genuinely satisfying rather than simply inevitable. Writing a mystery where the detective is brilliant requires a level of construction that writing a mystery where the detective is lucky simply does not. The writer's room churned through ideas at a remarkable pace, rejecting premises that would have required the Harts to miss something obvious. The audience never noticed the constraint. They just noticed that Jonathan and Jennifer always seemed to know exactly what they were doing. In 1983, a young Steven Spielberg visited the Heart to Heart set during a production break, brought by a mutual friend and curious about how the show managed to sustain its particular tone across so many episodes. By that point, Spielberg had already directed Jaws, Close Encounters, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and E.T., and his presence on any set carried a gravitational weight that made people stand slightly straighter. What happened instead was that Spielberg spent most of his visit laughing. He found the whole operation genuinely charming, the efficiency of it, the professionalism, the easy warmth between Wagner and Powers during downtime. He reportedly told Wagner afterward that Heart to Heart achieved something his own productions occasionally struggled with, which was making difficulty look completely invisible. Wagner thanked him, reportedly with considerable grace, and then went back to work. The story circulated through the production for the rest of the season. Not as name-dropping, but as genuine encouragement. If Spielberg thought they were doing something right, perhaps they were doing something right. Heart to Heart's legacy ultimately rests on something simpler and more durable than its mysteries, its locations, its cars, or its clothes. It rests on the argument it made every single Friday night for 5 consecutive years, which was that a great love story doesn't need unresolved tension to stay interesting. Jonathan and Jennifer Hart were committed to each other in a way that the show never questioned and never complicated for dramatic convenience. They didn't have secret resentments or wandering eyes or fundamental incompatibilities that would eventually tear them apart. They just had each other, a large house, a loyal housekeeper, a chaotic dog, and an inexplicable tendency to discover felonies at dinner parties. And that was enough, more than enough. In a television landscape full of friction and competition and romantic uncertainty deployed as a substitute for actual storytelling, the Heart stood apart by simply being happy. Genuinely, completely, convincingly happy. Audiences in 1979 were hungry for that, and it turned out audiences in every decade since have been equally hungry for exactly the same thing. Long after the show ended, Stefanie Powers revealed that she and Robert Wagner had developed a private tradition during production that nobody outside the immediate cast ever fully knew about. Before particularly demanding scenes requiring emotional precision or physical complexity or the kind of sustained concentration that a full shooting day can erode, the two of them would find a quiet corner of the set, away from the crew and the cameras and the controlled chaos of television production, and they would simply talk, not about the scene, not about the script, about whatever was actually on their minds that day. It might be 5 minutes, it might be 15, but the ritual was consistent, and both of them have described it as the foundation of everything that made the show work. Because what the audience was watching every week wasn't 2 actors performing intimacy. It was 2 people who had genuinely taken the time to know each other, again and again, through 5 seasons and 8 reunion films, and all the grief and loss and difficulty that the years between them contained. The Harts were fictional. What powered them never was.